From Carr, Riggs, and Ingram, this is It Figures, the CRI podcast, an accounting, advisory, and industry-focused podcast for business and organization leaders, entrepreneurs, and anyone who is looking to go beyond the status quo.
Hello, I want to welcome you to the latest of our Ransomware podcast. I'm John Heath. I'm the Director of Professional Services here at Carr, Riggs, and Ingram. And I would like to introduce you to David Mills and Tyler Mills. David, you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, thanks, John. I'm David Mills. I'm the Director of IT Audit and Assurance for the firm. And just want to welcome you to the podcast. Tyler?
Hey, I'm Tyler Mills. I'm a partner with IT Audit and Assurance. And welcome to the podcast.
So I think what we really want to do, our belief is that whoever wins the data race is the winner, the ultimate winner in the future. And one of the most critical things related to data is protecting that asset. It's a valuable one. Probably, we also think data is sort of like the new oil. And so we want to talk about how people might exploit that asset, take advantage of it. And we've seen a big uptick in ransomware attacks. And so we want to talk about several things there, how they occur, what we're seeing, why the frequency is up now. So David and Tyler, maybe you can share with us what we're seeing in practice.
Sure, no problem. So I think everybody's aware that we've had some fairly significant, and I use that term a little bit lightly, but fairly significant ransomware attacks in the recent history here. We've got obviously the pipeline attack that everybody's heard about. There's been several more ransomware attacks, and it truly is really starting to escalate. Now, I do have, if there's a little light at the end of the tunnel, as we get a little down the road here, I'm going to give you some info about one of the main ransomware companies and where they stand today. But if you kind of take a look at this, we've got ransomware this is some 2020 data, pretty late 2020, but takes about 21 days for the average to recover from the average ransomware attack. That is that's just the downtime due to ransomware. That's not fully recovered. That is actually just for the downtime. The fully recovered days, it takes 287 days on average to recover fully. And that's, basically get it remediated, put in the new defenses and be prepared to hopefully thwart a future attack. 287 days. 2020, there was over $350 million paid in ransomware. That's a 311% increase over 2019. Average payment went up 171% to $312,000. That is the average payment. So, whereas when we first started seeing this way back in the day, when we had the hospital out in California, and I believe the ransomware was $3,600. It's come a long way, and it is really been a big problem for a lot of industries. Tyler, can you kind of speak a little bit maybe to some of the industries that have been affected by this?
Sure. I mean, there's not really an industry that's immune to it. As data becomes more valuable and sort of makes the world go round, and they know they can get more money for it. I can say that there's some interesting statistics as far as governmental clients or our governmental entities are concerned. Is that's sticking up quite a bit in the last 2 years. It's gone up about 50% in the total number of attacks, and at least 40 states experienced one attack in 2020, paying up to at least $500,000. So it's clear that it's getting pretty far-reaching, especially in the private sector, but it's in the public sector as well.
Hey, thanks a lot for that. Yeah, it really has gotten to be quite the annoyance for a lot of people, and unfortunately, what we're seeing now is that they're attacking places that have a couple of things in common. One, they may have good cyber insurance, and two, they obviously one of the things they look for is weak defenses. Unfortunately, when you're talking about that combination, a lot of times things like governmental comes into play, education comes into play, sometimes healthcare, and so it really is across the board to everything. And when you're hit by this, it can be completely and utterly devastating. We've heard horror stories from folks that literally went back to pure paper and pencil. Their systems were so infected and so encrypted that they literally could not even bring up their network and did not want to pay the ransom. So they literally start from scratch. So a big problem there when you're talking about the devastation that this type of attack can actually cause a business or an entity. I think that we're obviously seeing some super high dollars being requested for ransom. Some of these, we've heard numbers like $50 million, $30 million. Certainly $1 million is really not anything that they even consider to be a problem. They asked for $1 million, like it was almost nothing. The problem with these is that they've gotten some really good sophistication in their process. These are not just single person shops that are maybe working out of their basement. These are oftentimes nation states, and that means that they've got not only the technology, the technical sophistication, but they've also got the backing monetarily to develop those processes. We're seeing some things that I find really interesting. One of them is when they first started, ransomware gangs or even individuals would really do all of their own work. But now we're seeing the rise of what's referred to as initial access brokers. And these initial access brokers are effectively trying to get credentials, and then they're selling the credentials to the ransomware gangs. And so you may have, and that we think, as far as reading goes, we think that that's probably what happened during this pipeline attack. They purchased an account and password that had VPN access, and that was the way they were able to leverage their tools. These initial access brokers are really the ones that are trying to ferret out admin accounts. They're trying to trick people into giving them information about their accounts, and we're still seeing a lot of that being given up. Tyler, you want to comment on those, on how often we're still seeing that being given up?
Yeah, absolutely. Social engineering is always going to be your number one attack vector. Until you can somehow take people out of the equation, that's always going to be where the problem is. One of my favorite quotes that I've seen recently is, I've always said cybersecurity is more about people behind the keyboard than it is about the actual technology. And I think that's really, really a fair statement. And we always stress that people train their folks, and see if they can identify those red flags and people trying to obtain their credentials and their information, and make sure that they can recognize when that kind of attack is happening.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. We still see quite often when we run some social engineering tests, even if we're running them, on a regular basis, we still see, people failing those social engineering tests. It's just really difficult to try to get those folks to understand just how critical it is that they never provide their password or authentication information to anybody, no matter who they are. The admin folks, as you know, can obviously, if they need to do something and they need your username and password, they've got the capability to actually go in and change that and do what they need to do and then let you know. But at no time should anybody, the golden rule of security, should anybody ever give up their username and password, outside of their own mind to anybody. So it's really kind of a problem. But now, two factors come a long way, Tyler. How well do you think that's working, and how effective is that?
I think MFA is really important. And it depends on what kind of MFA you're using, because as that kind of technology grows, the ability to spoof that technology also grows. So we're seeing a big uptick in leading industry practices saying that text messages are sort of on their way to being no longer appropriate for multi-factor authentication, because it's pretty easy to spoof a phone number and intercept that kind of stuff. But true multi-factor authentication, where you can sort of guarantee that there is a second piece that you can attribute to an individual person, without a ton of failure. It's really, really important that get done.
So what you're talking about there for that true two-factor authentication, that's the use of the tokens. Is that correct?
Yeah, token or an authentication app is kind of where the industry's headed. Tokens are sort of going away. They still exist, but the hardware token it costs money and you have to distribute them. But really and truly, that's probably the best way to do it. But you're seeing a lot of these apps, people integrating with Duo is a really good example of an app that gets integrated with an MFA system. Google can also do it. Microsoft Authenticator can do it in some cases. If you're using Azure for authentication. So it's sort of going that way. It's still on your phone, but it's a more secure way of communicating back and forth with that authentication server than a text message is.
Yeah, so I think what we're saying here is any type of multi-factor authentication is better than no multi-factor authentication.
Better than nothing.
Yeah. So
yes.
So I think that's probably a key aspect here. We see a lot of folks that are implementing that, a lot of folks that are looking at tools to implement that. That's something that I personally think ought to be on everybody's radar. If it's not implemented, it ought to be something that there's a plan in place actually to implement. That's sort of a preventative measure, if you will. Of course, it goes along with the scanning and the malware detection that we're all used to dealing with. But let's talk a little bit about, heaven forbid you get caught with ransomware and kind of some of the things that you could have in place to help you recover from that. That's one of the biggest keys. And when we say recover without paying the ransom. So there's two main areas that Tyler, I want to flip to you to kind of talk a little bit about. One of them is this idea of off-network backups using maybe portable devices or off-network SANs, and the other is something that I've seen lately, which is called immutable backups. Even though these are really still not 100% effective. They are pretty good at giving you a reasonable chance to recover without paying that ransom. So, Tyler, can you tell us a little bit about these off-network backups and the immutable backup?
Sure. So, just to kind of start with the immutable backup piece, immutable backup really just means that it's read-only. That those backups, once they're made, they cannot be written to, cannot be written over, cannot be changed. Et cetera. That's what the word immutable sort of means in that context. So,
and even can't be deleted in some cases, correct?
Yes, yeah. So that's a really nice thing to have if you can get it. Some cloud providers have started offering it as part of their backup suites. If you can get it, that's great. It's kind of hard to do that without that power of a cloud-based third-party provider. It's sort of hard to get that put together, but it can be done. It seems kind of like a no-brainer. Like if your backups can't be written to, then of course there's no way for there's no way for ransomware to affect the backup. But if you think about how much storage that would then take up, how often are you backing up? Because you have to create a complete full backup that's read only every single time, which is not tenable in most situations. So cloud based backups are really built for that kind of thing, and giving you quote unquote unlimited amount of storage to store that kind of thing. The off network backup is a little bit more attainable even for folks at home. Simply like David said, it could be just moving portable storage from one place to the other. If you do your backup and then keep it offsite in a bank vault or something, we used to see that a lot, where people would put a hard drive in a bank vault and rotate that hard drive out every so often, every 2 weeks or so, just to have that completely isolated set of backup data. Even if you were going to lose anything that you didn't back up until the next one, you could still at least get to that point. Which is actually a really big part of analyzing your risk and business impact as far as how often you should back up is concerned. Another way to get that done is to actually mirror that backup from on-site to a different location. The issue there might come up that the replication process, you have to be connected in some way. So at some point, it's possible that ransomware migrates from the production into the backup via that same pipeline. So that's kind of where that immutable backup piece comes in. But again, this all comes down to, how often are you backing up your data? How much data could you stand to lose if the situation called for it? Those are really important pieces to this puzzle.
Yeah, so kind of what I'm hearing is and I agree with you. It's really all about understanding and planning those backups, and the methods that you're going to use with ransomware in mind. I know that recently I've seen that Veeam, which is one of the main virtual vendors there, with their I believe it started at 10.0 and above. Veeam actually has the capability to do some immutable backups along over to what we refer to or what's known as an Amazon S3 secure bucket. And that is a pretty doggone good way to get that immutable backup. And still to this day, storage is still pretty cheap compared to the ransom that you could possibly pay. It's almost kind of a no-brainer thing to look into that. When we're saying our offline backups and we're talking about that, it's kind of funny because what's old is new again. If you remember, this is the same thing that used to be done with tapes. Unfortunately, tapes weren't very reliable, but it did provide some off-network backup, certainly. So, one of the things that we're talking about here is that the problem is you would have to go back and restore from something that did not have the original malware on it. So oftentimes that can lead you back a little farther than you'd really like to go from a data recovery perspective.
Also, there's the piggybacking off of that, the consideration is, how do you know how far back you have to go? And you may never know the answer to that question, but it will at least take up resources just kind of figuring out, when did the infection actually occur? If we restore from a week ago, is it in that backup and it hasn't been activated at that time? So is it going to happen again? Like that's a really, that can take up a lot of time and a lot of resources just to figure that piece out on its own. So I think that the medium that you want to strike is you want to be backing up something that, even if it's not technically immutable, something that's off network, segregated, isolated in some way, often enough that it wouldn't impact you enough to have to pay the ransom if that happens. So really that needs to be happening, depending on your risk appetite. It could be every day. It could be, once a week. It could be once a month, depending on what that is. But those real-time hourly backups that happen, that a lot of people are doing, those are the ones that are most susceptible to actually carrying over that malware. So you want to make sure that you've got a good plan for if we're doing this backup, this often, and malware hits, how far back are we going to lose before we get back to that isolated backup?
Yeah, and that's always a hard one to try to figure out. The business units within these companies really would say zero data loss. A lot of times that's really not feasible. I've even heard lately of folks doing recovery in an isolated environment to try to make sure or see if they can clean anything that might have still been left over from that particular backup. So, that's another technique that is being used. I think that what we're saying here is that this is not just something that you need to take lightly. It requires a lot of planning. It requires quite a bit of understanding where your risks are and understanding what as Tyler said, what your risk appetite is. Couple of things that did occur, recently with some of these larger ransomware breaches is they kind of put it on the radar for the government, the FBI, Homeland Security, and they've even formed they formed a task force to actually try to combat ransomware at the U.S. That the U.S. government has formed. There's some problems with that in that once you get on that radar and it starts to be an act of terrorism, things get a little bit more complicated for the bad guys, with their ability to, should they get caught, with their ability to survive it without doing some prison time. And so I think that may have at least alerted a little bit of these nation states, with the idea that the U.S. is pretty serious about this now. One gang that I had done some reading on had actually closed down. It was a group that was called. Let me type for me just one second.
While you're looking for that stuff, early in the conversation, you mentioned that insurance and having a large amount of cyber insurance that could potentially cover you in the case of ransomware is becoming a reason for people to hit you with it, because they know that you've got the insurance. You'd rather just pay it and get it over with and not have to worry about anything. And I think that's really interesting that we're kind of getting there, because I do a lot of work in the banking industry, in the financial sector, as far as IT assessments are concerned, and the regulatory examinations that are happening are pivoting almost entirely to ransomware. They're sort of looking at everything through the lens of being prepared for ransomware now. A couple of states have come up with a specific risk assessment that they want you to fill out. That's about ransomware. The incident response planning is to be seen through the lens of ransomware. Backup and recovery obviously is. So it's interesting. And then of course they ask that you have adequate insurance coverage if something like that does happen. So it's interesting as those controls are being put in place, that they're actually becoming almost a new incentive for these attackers. It's kind of a weird thing to think about.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and it certainly does enter into the attacker's business model. The group that I was going to tell you about here is a group that is called Evadden ransomware, and not too long ago they actually shut down their operation and gave back all the keys. Before that, they were known as one of the most ruthless gangs because they would not budge, in their negotiations very much for their ransoms. So if you can imagine it, literally this has gotten to the point where there are negotiators on both sides trying to work out a deal to pay that ransom. Much like trying to like a merger contract or something like that. So it has really gotten sophisticated, and it's definitely something that we as IT auditors are really concerned about. So much so that we've added specific ransomware controls testing to our our IT audit programs. And so, as we kind of wind this up, we want you to think about this. If you're concerned about your ability to do that, make sure that you've got some testing done, preferably by an independent third party, for your ransomware recovery capabilities and your protections. That's one thing that we think is just so important in this day and time. As always, if you want to talk to Carr, Riggs, and Ingram about that, we'd be happy to do so. And I'd be happy for you to get on the website and fill out an inquiry form, and we'd be happy to talk to you about the services that we offer to help you with this. So, John, I'll turn it back over to you.
Well, David and Tyler, I want to say thank you for the wonderful insights you guys share with us today. And we also want to thank our listeners. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you want to know more, that website that David was just referring to is cricpa.com. And it has a wealth of knowledge about this and many other services that the firm provides. We look forward to seeing you in the future and serving you as well.
If you want more CRI insights or are interested in learning about our firm, please visit our website at cricpa.com. Thanks for listening to this episode of It Figures, the CRI podcast. You can subscribe to It Figures on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you prefer to listen to your podcasts. If you liked what you heard today, please leave us a review.